Hi there, and welcome to today's topic. Wow. Oh, this is a big one. And it's something that keeps coming up, and it's been coming up for years. You're going to love this topic. Sacred rage. Yeah, we're going to go there today. Now, I've got my notes because I don't want to miss a thing. And I kind of want to dive into this topic because I've heard it as sacred rage is not a good thing or sacred rage is a great thing. And depending on which camp you fall in, maybe I'll change your mind. I don't know. I'm not really here to change your mind, actually. But what I am here to do is maybe to help more clearly define what sacred rage is, why it shows up, the ways it shows up, and then we can decide and choose whether we want to participate in it, allow it, feel it, express it, and decide if it's something that it feels like we need. So come along for the ride. Let's talk about it. And I call this episode Tending the Fire. Redivining Yourself is a podcast for those ready to reclaim their power, embrace transformation, and consciously create their next chapter. Through honest conversations, soulful insights, and practical wisdom, each episode explores what it means to choose yourself, release limiting beliefs, and navigate life's transitions with courage and grace. Now, before we get into this topic of sacred rage, I want to talk about one of the most repressed, suppressed, unexpressed, hidden parts of ourselves. And I'm speaking from experience. For me, anger was and always has been one of those shadow ranges. Now, when I talk about shadows, this is one of those parts of ourselves that I and you, every one of us, shadows are those parts of ourselves that we are hesitant to claim, that we most deny about ourselves, that we most loathe about ourselves. And yet, it's when we try and push them away and deny that we have these shadows, or that we, worse yet, don't express any of these shadows in a really healthy way, because I think there are unhealthy ways to express anger and there are healthy ways to express anger. And for me, it was always condoned. It was something that I was not allowed to express as a young woman, a young girl, nor as a grown woman. It was something that I felt very uncomfortable with, and it made the people around me in my life also very uncomfortable. It was something that I had to repress and suppress to the point where when it did come out, it wasn't pretty. I'm going to do a tell on myself here. I even remember there was a time where, I don't know why, but one of my girl cousins, I don't have many, I hadn't seen her in years. I'm probably 10 or 11 when I see her, and I'm not even sure I had seen her before then. But at that age, back in the 70s in particular, she was my competition. She was beautiful, she was thin, she was, just as talented and gifted and all those things that I thought I was. And for some reason, I just chose her as my competition, and I didn't like it. And so she came out to visit, and she kind of pushed all my buttons, and sort of funny when I think back on it, and sad. But also, we became the best of friends after this happened. And I think she was sensing and feeling the same thing, that we were each other's competition, even though we're cousins. but we had never really spent much time together. And so my older cousin played the drums, and he's just going at it, playing Beatles songs and everything. And I was just dancing and having the time of my life, but she was right there. And it made me so angry that she could do all the things I could do. And so at one point, it kind of got a little bit more physical. And I'm not going to lie, like we went after each other. We fists fly and everything. My cousin had to jump behind the drum set and, break us up. And it was in that moment that I recognized rage. This wasn't anger to me. This had now reached a crescendo and a boiling point that I only allowed myself to feel maybe twice in my young life. And I was embarrassed. I was absolutely, thoroughly embarrassed by my behavior. And I think she was too. And I think it shocked us that we could even get to a place like that. And that theme continued throughout my life. I can remember feeling angry many times in my life, and it was something that I just wasn't allowed to express. It was something that young girls, women, we weren't allowed to get angry. And if we did, we certainly weren't allowed to express it. So what do we do with those emotions when we repress them and suppress them, right? I mean, I had stuffed anger down so far down into my pinky toes that even as an adult, it was only when I would become incensed enough to allow this, anger, this rage. And I'm going to say that I didn't allow the anger enough, and so it did turn into rage. It literally just, I would just every now and then lose my shit. So if you have little kids in the room, here's your warning. There may be a couple of those words like that. So I apologize. I should have warned you in advance. But if you have littles around, maybe you don't want to put this on speakerphone or speaker. Because I think when we talk about fire and when we talk about anger and this shadow part of ourselves, including sacred rage, it does kind of conjure up this stronger language that my grandmother always felt like I didn't need in order to fully express myself. But I'm not going to lie. Sometimes throwing an F-bomb or something feels really good. It's another way to just allow myself to express some of those more intense feelings. So consider yourself now warned. And this continued pattern, this continued theme throughout my life of unexpressed, repressed, suppressed anger has led me to those moments of rage. And I used to be really embarrassed even as an adult. I mean, 3 years ago, I would have never admitted that, I could get to that place. My goal these days is not necessarily to allow it to get to rage, but to be able to express those emotions as they come. And it truly has been in the last 2 years that I've even been given the opportunity, the place, the people, the right circumstances to truly be able to explore not only all of my shadows, all of those ranges, in addition to anger. So, jealousy, resentment, bitterness, being incompetent was another one of my shadows and probably still is, but not to the degree that it once was. So all of those parts of myself that most of us tend to frown upon, that society frowns upon. And being able to be in a safe, beautiful space where this collective field that we were in, where we were able to actually come together and not only explore our ranges, but other people's ranges, and also be able to, even at one point, even be able to come together to express our collective rage. And to me, that's what truly defines this sacred rage. And so we hear a lot about it, especially in the world of, when we talk, it's funny, lately I've been thinking about like wild women, like rewilding women. And this is an arena where especially that sacred rage tends to be talked about, that we tend to name it the most. And so I really want to find a way to not only differentiate the two, but to also clarify that we can all have our shadows and we can all have these aspects to ourselves that we don't want to claim and name and feel. And yet, on an individual basis, when we don't do that, that is, in my way of understanding sacred rage and defining it, and having other people define it, that it's more of a collective experience when we talk about this sacred rage. And that's not to say that we can't have that individually. I think it's best if I give you some definitions of the way that, I have had sacred rage transcribed and described to me. So let's first just talk about, rage is an expression of repressed anger, where it wasn't safe to express it, where anger is even hard to be with, or you're hard to be with, right? You may have even heard or felt that description of I can't be around you when you're like this. And rage is something that can lead to abusive behaviors. And that's typically where we see anger cross the line, and it was so repressed that it came out so much louder than what it maybe needed to be. And I'm not saying that rage is always unhealthy, but, if you put enough powder into a keg and then you light it, it's going to blow up. And that's just the truth. And so I think that for us to just acknowledge first that, there's sort of ranges with these shadows, right? And so, for example, if we take the range of anger, the lower octave, the lower, intensity of it would just be irritability or kind of confrontational. And then we can assume that with escalation, with more repression or greater fuel added to that, that then we tend to get into anger, right? Now we're throwing things, punching things, hopefully not other people, but we know that that does happen. And we move across that spectrum, that range of that shadow, and eventually we're going to get to rage, right? That's over here, and irritability and confrontational is over here, right? So we have this full range that when I talk about exploring these ranges, these aspects of yourselves that you may not love, it is important that we experience all of that range. not just the irritability, not just being angry about something, but over here we have rumination and we have rage. And absolutely, it's great to be able to choose when you are going to allow that to be expressed. And I lovingly bring this up because I feel like right now we're in a bit of a pressure cooker that we collectively and individually have been experiencing this for some time. That our shadows that we have never really dealt with, only now, because we are experiencing sort of this tightening, this squeezing of both the timelines that we're in and also just our experience as a spiritual being having a human experience, that we're starting to collectively feel this more and more. And it feels like a really good time that we talk about this now. So that to me is the greatest way to look at this shadow side of ourselves, that we can try and deny it, but it's still a part of ourselves. Everybody gets angry, right? I mean, if you don't get angry, I honestly question what's going on with you. If you know, I have a friend that she's like, I just don't get angry. I just don't let things bother me. Okay. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's just her truth. But I find that almost impossible to believe. So without the judgment for that, I feel like, and I question whether that's just another way to disown that part of ourselves, to not claim that aspect of ourselves that, you know, I wonder what her story is around that aspect of herself and being able to express it. So there is the range now that you know that we're sort of talking about. And with this sacred rage, I'm going to give you another definition that I absolutely love. That sacred rage is a collective holding of anger. It's a collective holding of crossed boundaries. Now, take note, because I think you're going to notice that you may be able to tap into this root of sacred rage right now, because you may recognize some of this in your experience of daily life right now. So, there's the holding of anger collectively. There's the crossing of boundaries collectively. There is a lack of safety and definitely a lack of a sense of protection that is happening right now. And being unable to speak your truth. And I say truth always when I refer to it as your truth. It is truth with a capital T. Very important distinction. Or lacking the resources within to somehow be able to fuel your passions. So it can be your time, your energy, your financial resources that are impeding your ability to pursue your passions. So go through that list. See if any part of those resonate with you and if you are experiencing that. Because if any of those resonated with you, then welcome to the world of what sacred rage means, of the collective experience of all of these things happening now. And I have been traveling all over the state of Colorado recently and seeing family, going to weddings, talking to dear friends, lifelong friends, as well as new friends. And I'm seeing and I'm hearing this everywhere. Everybody is feeling it. And then the question becomes, what do we do with it? What do we individually do with our anger, with those things that we have been told to suppress, to not express, that, the collective experience of doing that together? What do we do with that experience? Because it's rare in our world, in our culture, in our experience that we're having right now, to have a place where you get to choose and be in charge of your experience and your reaction to what you are feeling. And that's a really hard thing to do. Because, those safe places, I feel like, have been largely absent. And I truly believe that a large part of this is because we have been pushed into this individualization, that we heal individually and we heal one-on-one, or we heal in isolation, rather than the old ways of doing this in community, in tribe, in a field of people who see you at your most intense, fiercest part of your being and say, yeah, I feel that. I feel that too. And that's part of the sacred rage that I feel is missing, that we need those outlets, we need those places. Because to me, sacred rage is also the fire that transcends your personal story, and it becomes a gift to the collective. And I was trying to think of some examples of this. And recently I had seen, and this is to me a form of, which I'll talk about in a moment, about taking action with the fire that you feel, right? Taking that collective holding and finding a way, a healthy way, to disperse that energy. So I'm thinking in particular about the couple who climbed the Empire State Building. Now, nowhere in my being, even as I say this, I can feel the fear of climbing to the top of the Empire State Building. And I don't even think that they were, attached to anything. I think it was just if they fell, they fell, but they didn't. And they got up there and they held this beautiful banner that I believe said, when the love of power is overtaken by the power of love, something along those lines. You can correct me, put it in the comments, please, because I know I'm not getting it right. But essentially, when the love of power no longer becomes greater than the power of love. And they put that banner up there and it was all over the news. All over the news. And for me, in my body, I could feel this collective and individual part of myself given like a, sorry, but fuck yeah, right? Like, yeah, I feel that. Yes, that message. And I could feel this internalized fire that I can feel it now. This rage within me about all of those cross boundaries and about having to hold all of these systematized and all of these unhealthy ways that we have been taught to internalize all of these feelings that we have. And I could feel it just well up in me to the point where I had tears. And tears are a wonderful expression of the other side of that fire, the other side of that rage. And mostly because it's water. It's tapping into the water. We have fire and water. And the one thing that extinguishes and calms and cools fire is water. And so to me, one of those healthy aspects of being able to express our anger is tears. And I'm sure you've had a few or thought about shedding a few in the last few months, maybe even years. So I hope that helps you to some degree be able to decipher this difference between just anger, rage, and then this sacred rage that we talk about. Because to be honest, I could hear that talked about in those, rooms where it was, we're talking about the divine feminine and we're talking about divine feminine rising and wildness. And yet I don't think we understand exactly what that means and what we do with it. Because I think what we're all looking for is that when we can embody and embrace that level of fire, that level of passion, that level of fuel, that it can light up the entire field of humanity. Just like that couple did that climbed the Empire State Building. That it felt like there was a collective yes to that. We need more of that. And it was a beautiful way to express that sacred rage without hurting anybody. And I know that they, got arrested, and I'm sure some people felt some kind of way about it, but I still think it was a remarkable demonstration of how we humans can choose a way to express this fire. A way that comes not from reactivity, but a way that comes from truth with that capital T, from clarity, and from purpose, in service of all, of greater humanity. Because I think when we ignite that fire and allow ourselves to express our anger, we clear the path. We get clarity about what matters to us. We become more fully alive. And to me, that's what inner fire is. It's an aliveness. It's this vital, it's this vital spark within us. But it's only really useful if we can welcome it all, that full range and all the other ranges of our human emotions, and also if we can love it all. And it's particularly powerful and amazing if you are ever given the opportunity to be in a collective field of people and experience it. And you may be wondering at this point, so Deb, how can I experience that? I've never been able to experience something like that. Honestly, I couldn't have imagined it before I did experience it. And it's still one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And I did that through an organization called Heart IQ. And I want to give Christian Pankhurst, his team, a massive shout out, because he's truly on to something in that this is one of his passions for this world. It's his vision for this world, that we can remember how to heal in tribe and understand that at one time we were the medicine. and that fire, our emotions. I mean, they're there for a reason. And that, anger is actually a healthy attribute. It's only when it's coming at people and coming out in ways that we don't want through our reactivity, rather than through the healthy capacity of our ability to hold our sacred no. And I say sacred no because, how many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no? To doing something, to being with certain people, to, whatever it is that you felt that no to, that sacred no. But for whatever reason, programming, fear, lack of confidence, whatever it was that you made you choose a yes instead of a no, that it strikes me that we don't even seem to fully weigh our no's and our yeses. Our ability to choose a sacred yes, I'm a sacred yes to that, or I am a sacred no to that. Because I don't want my boundaries crossed. Because I do want to hold myself sacred, and I do want to hold my ability to hold, for lack of a better word, to hold myself and that sacredness as holy, as the thing that I am unwilling to barter, compromise, or withhold from myself. And the reason why a lot of this came up is because as I was traveling around the state, it's interesting. I have a pattern that's been showing up this year. Now, one of my episodes was pattern recognition, and this is one of those patterns. And really, I do want to say this about that episode on pattern recognition, that really the most important thing about pattern recognition is understanding that human beings are meaning-making machines. We are meant, I believe, to make meaning out of everything that happens in our world, virtually everything. There are some things that you don't have to make meaning out of, but I think largely it's making meaning out of what happens in your daily life, what happens to you, what happens for you, what happens with your sacred yes, with your ability to co-create something. And I'll tell you the pattern and the way that I've been making meaning out of it. I even had a friend comment on it. So here's the story. Back in March, my husband and I strongly desired to take our kids and their significant others to Hawaii for a nice vacation that we haven't had in years. And I began having dreams, water dreams, for months before this happened. It's from the day we booked the tickets. In fact, so much so that I said, we should have insurance on this trip, because I kind of have a feeling. And so we make it from our home to San Francisco, and sure enough, we're on the plane ready to land in San Francisco, and we get notification that indeed our flights to Hawaii have been canceled. Because if you recall, back in March, Hawaii, especially Maui, was experiencing severe storms, like so much flooding. They would get 8 inches in maybe a day or an hour of rain. So we couldn't get to our hotel. The planes weren't wanting to land even. And so I kind of took note, that these dreams I had had about water and the sacredness of water and honoring water all made sense, right? That was my meaning making of that experience. And so much so that before we even got the text, I just had this gut feeling that this trip wasn't going to happen, that somehow things were going to go poorly. And I wasn't disappointed when it happened. It was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Of course this was going to happen. And so when I recently began going to different parts of Colorado, and every time I would arrive in a new place, a fire would break out. And I'm not kidding about this. And I even had my friends say to me, what is up with you and fires and floods and all the natural things? It seems like wherever you go, there's a natural disaster. Now, I certainly had no hand in the Hawaii flooding, and I definitely have not had a hand in those fires in the locations that I've been to, but it's been a theme where I guess the best laid plans, right? They're not going to happen. And so the water I understood, and I was able to give meaning to that experience, and not just for the planet, but also for my family. Because, there was, I think, a lot emotionally that maybe we've never dealt with, that we've never fully processed. So it was very interesting that that was happening at that time. And then the fires came. And fire to me has such a different meaning to it than I think even most of us are even aware of. And it feels like this is really important because here we are in Colorado, Utah, Arizona. I mean, you name it, there are fires really, and just extreme heat, even to that extent that we're even witnessing that right now. So the meaning maker in me says, what's the deeper meaning of all of this? Because I think it applies not only to rage, anger, and sacred rage, but I think that it also points to something that we have forgotten about fire, about the importance that the role fire has in all of our lives. I think that fire, it tells us what's really important, what really matters. Because if that fire is coming towards your home, you're not able to grab the things that are really important to you. You know that you're going to lose them in the fire. I think just escaping with your life and your loved ones is the thing that matters the most. And I know that there is significant loss when you lose a home and you lose all of your belongings and not feeling safe, whether it's in that moment or for months when, you have to be at the ready for whenever a fire is going to come. And it's been a big theme in Colorado, certainly for years, but if you live anywhere in the Southwest, fire is always a danger. And we're all witnessing all of those losses, the loss of water, the loss of belongings, of feeling a sense of belonging to a place. I think we're having this collective grief around all of that. But I think it's also, of course, it's easy for me to sit here and say this because I haven't lost a home in the fire or any loved ones. But I do think if we can reframe what's happening right now in terms of these fires and how we relate to fire and the fires within us as well as outside of us. because I believe fire is a great ancestor. It's ancient. I mean, I think that certainly we need fire for life. We need fire to warm our drinks, to cook our food. We need fire to turn clay into pots. We need fire to gather. You know, I keep telling my husband, I want a fire pit, but I know the fire danger is really high. Even if I'm doing it safely and at my home, it still doesn't feel entirely safe. But I desperately want it because to me, it represents something so much more divine than the usually subscribed destruction, the death. I mean, if we're being honest, like, this is what indigenous cultures have known for years, is that, fire was a reason for them to come together and sing throughout the night. It was a source for them to heat their water, to cook their corn, their cacao. It was intended to be used for praying for the land. And ultimately, fire is what returns us to the earth if we're cremated or we get buried, right? Less so if you just have a natural burial, but, certainly a lot of people are choosing cremation these days, and it definitely ashes to ashes. There's a reason we say that. And part of my initiation into this fire gratitude was that a couple of years ago, I was immensely honored to be invited to attend a fire ceremony. And it was lovingly held by one of the elders in training of the fire keepers of Mexico. And the fire keepers in Mexico are very devoted to the point where they stay up in the mountains of Mexico and they rarely leave. Rarely. Only when they feel called to go to a place. And as I'm even saying this now, I recall that this younger gentleman that was holding the ceremony for us, he had mentioned that he had no idea why he had been called to Colorado other than the elders sent him there. And they said, you need to go to Colorado. And he felt very strongly that, there was a reason that he was there. And I know this was a couple of years ago, but the impact, I don't think, was lost on any of us. The impact that fire has in our lives. And as we spent the night watching the fire and tending to the fire and listening to the fire and offering our prayers to the fire, one of the things that I remember he said was, "Grandfather Fire, you are the ancient memory from the light of the stars. You remember, you listen, you speak, and you speak to the sacredness of our human family." And I do think that we have forgotten fire and its importance, even now, even with the looming threat of fire all around us. We've become so accustomed to flicking a switch or turning a knob that gives us fire that we've lost our connection to not only the fire that we ignite in a fire pit, in our fireplaces, but also our own internal fire. that we haven't even been tending to our internal fires. And, I kept thinking about that phrase whenever I would look at how bad the fires were, what was the percentage of containment? Zero containment, 0%. And it kind of feels like that's what we're sitting with right now in ourselves. Like, how are we trying to contain and manage that fire within? I don't think that's something that we've been taught to do in our culture. Because we're disconnected from ourselves, we've become disconnected from our families, from our children, from our communities, our neighbors. I think that we've also lost access to our inner fire, which is also our potency, our grief, our rage, our choice, and our choosing when to have and hold rage. And it's our ability to be able to tend to our fire and to the fires that I think is the meaning of this experience collectively that we're in right now. It certainly gives, if nothing else, a different perspective on what we're experiencing right now. And it's going to require the integration, or I should say reintegration, of those aspects of ourselves, the unrecognized, the unrehearsed, the suppressed and hidden parts of ourselves, and the unconscious parts of ourselves. Because as women, I think, I would certainly say that, particularly if you're a woman of color, it's doubly so for you. But I think that our ability to express that anger has not been welcome for centuries, for a long time. And so one of the things that I wanted to offer up today was a couple of questions for you to maybe see if you can let them into your being as seeds for growth, seeds for contemplation, seeds for allowing. And if you don't have pen and paper and you want to write this question down, but one of the first questions that I have for you is, where have you been repressing your fire? Where in your life do you hold back, hold on to, hold in? I think it's a really valuable and necessary thing for us to look at right now. And the second question for you is there any possibility that your health issues and your struggles related to your emotions are related? Let me rephrase that. Are your health issues and struggles possibly related to emotions that you're not allowing? And I don't want you to judge it. I just want you to just trust that what comes up for you is true for you. I just want you to notice. And I really want you to think of fire as your ally, as your friend. Even to the extent that when it's burning all of these forests, can we in any way view it as an ally right now to help us move through this process and this transformation that we are collectively and individually experiencing. Because I think it literally can be fuel for change. And I hope that you would be able to even view your inner fire, your intolerance, your irritability, your anger, and even your rage as part of what will make meaning out of all of this for us now. I think it's a really important gift right now that if we can reframe in any way what we are experiencing right now. It's kind of this idea of like, for me as a spiritual being, it's tending to the world in me that exists within the world that I live in, that we all live in. And I think that that's a great way to frame spirituality, is that we are all trying to make meaning out of what we're experiencing. And I think that we are deeply in it, but it's part of our growth. And it's uncomfortable, and it's exhausting, and it's hard, and it's sad, traumatic. But I do think that this is what we need right now. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to hear from you as to what your experience is now. And maybe you have another definition of sacred rage that you want to offer. Or even your experience of your anger, those shadow parts of yourself that you were also told were not okay. There's plenty of them. I'd love to know. And if you enjoyed this podcast today, I would love for you to like it, share it, subscribe to it on whatever platform that you're listening to. And thank you, as always, for being here. Because your presence, your fire, is so welcome here. Until next time, stay divine.